Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Xoogler meetup. We run over 300 meetups a year, featuring guest speakers as well as specialists on different topics. I know all of you here are here to talk about immigration issues, challenges, and opportunities, actually. I want to introduce myself as well as the Xoogler community before turning it over to our esteemed panel. My name is Chris Fong. I was at Google from 2006 to 2015. I was worried about getting laid off while I was on my own green card process. So thank you everyone for coming and joining this panel. So we will actually have three panelists. Kazuki-san is one of our main Xoogler leaders and organizers. We run over 300 events a year with the help of over 100 volunteers. So thank you, Kazuki-san, for organizing so many events and programs for us on our behalf. Why don't we start with a panel of introduction? For folks who have questions, please feel free to type on the chat. I won't say your name when I ask those questions. What I also do, as you can imagine, a lot of people are interested in joining this panel discussion but couldn't make it. What I'll do after general discussion, probably in 30 minutes, actually stop the recording and allow people to actually ask specific questions that they have. So there's a bit more privacy. So why don't we start by introducing a Xoogler. Shreenath, why did I invite you to be sitting on this panel, and what can you share with the audience today?
Hi, everyone. I know it's a really tough time, so I'll start by saying I feel for you, empathize with you, and I've been through this before. And especially if you're international, I doubly feel your pain because my first job out of college, I got laid off after 2 years, and I was on H1B. I was in consulting, and I went through a lot of stress. After that, went through a few bumps, made it okay, and then was at Google from 2011 to 2021, and now I'm working on building my own startup. But I just wanted to share that, I totally resonate with all the stress and fears that everyone has, and we'll talk more about it. But there's support for you always.
Great, Manan, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chris, and really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more about what we're doing and hopefully some opportunities ahead for many of you that are interested in the pathway of entrepreneurship at this point. I'm Manan. I'm one of the founding partners of a venture firm called Unshackled Ventures. We've been around for about 9 years now. And our thesis is to invest in foreign-born entrepreneurs, and that means providing initial investment capital as if we were the friends and family. Alongside of that, full immigration support, including visa sponsorship. H1Bs are quite common. And the third thing is surrounding you with a community of people that can be your entrepreneurial community. We've done about 200 immigration filings for the last 9 years with 100% success in both short-term work authorization and ultimately working towards the green card process, whether it be through an I-140, O1, EB1 process, certainly not EB2 if you're from India. That would take you 100 years. But we are really focused on making sure that the question that is being asked, which is, can I start a company while on a visa? That the answer is always yes. Not yes, but yes, and it is yes, full stop. And we've been very fortunate to have done that now for nearly 200 entrepreneurs over the last 9 years.
Thank you so much, man. I myself wanted to start a company when I was on a visa, so love the work that your team has been doing over the past few years. So Dennis, I know you and your team have been so helpful to a lot of immigration, so a lot of founders, but also people who don't want to be founders. So please introduce yourself and talk to us more about who you are, what your firm does, and what folks here could perhaps reach out in the future as well.
Yeah, Christopher, thanks for the opportunity. My name is Dennis Hall. I'm a senior associate with IMI Partner. We are a full service law firm that specializes in dealing with companies that are just getting footing in their awareness and companies that are more broad in their awareness as well, helping them navigate the immigration process, both on the non-immigrant visa side and the immigrant visa side, as well as helping to establish the immigration policy and working with a lot of these companies and their venture capital firms into establishing their immigration policies and moving forward in the immigration space overall. So my background essentially has been working in the space for about 8 or 9 years at this point, primarily specializing in helping Fortune 100 companies, specifically serving about 3 years with Google, 2 years with Amazon, and some of the other companies as well.
Thank you, everyone. Why don't we just go straight to some of the key questions people have asked? I think everyone has this question. How long can one legally stay in the country after termination date? And if there's any grace period after termination date, can a new employer sponsored do the H1B transfer in the transition period?
So I feel like, yeah, if no one wants to jump in on this, I can certainly take that. So H1B employees that are essentially separated from their positions are, as you said, Christopher, placed on a grace period. And this time is particularly important. It's essentially used to organize your affairs to either get ready to depart the US or potentially have a new application filed on your behalf. So those grace period days typically start from the moment the employee is separated from their period of employment. There are different interpretations that can float around, but under black letter of the law, the day you stop working with that company is the day the grace period typically starts. How long does it last for? Well, the grace period typically lasts for about 60 calendar days or until the I-94 expires. So this could be tricky in some instances to figure out, but typically whichever is shorter is going to be the controlling point here. So what's going to be actually more relevant is actually for some individuals who recently went through the H1B cap lottery process this past year. For those individuals who underwent a change of status, you might look at your I-94 for your F1 status and it says D/S, meaning duration of stay. So you might be asking, how am I going to be able to figure out how much I-94 time I have left? So for those individuals, I would say, look to your H1B 797 approval notice. The bottom portion of those notices typically serve as an I-94 and actually have an I-94 record number that matches your most recent entry. So to that end, look to that bottom portion to determine when exactly your 60 days might potentially expire.
Maybe a quick follow-up is the questions talk about people were informed on January 20th. Were they laid off that date or was it March 31st, the last pay date?
So if they're separated from their employment, I would say as a conservative measure, the last day they were actually working with the company is the start of their 60-day grace period. There are some legal teams who are willing to try to stretch that period a little bit more, where some legal teams have been successful with utilizing the last pay stub as the start of that 60-day grace period. So I wouldn't recommend this as a standard approach overall. It would really depend on the reviewing officer who's looking at the case. If they're feeling particularly helpful that day, they may agree with your analysis. However, if they decide to stick to the black letter of the law, you could be out of your 60-day grace period and might not be able to benefit from any prospective change of status or any transfer of employment to a new H1B employer.
Let me just turn to Manan as a next question. How have you been able to mentor and help a lot of other folks? Clearly, Google is not the first company that's laid off immigrant potential founders. Have people applied for jobs, then looked for founding a company? Have they done it concurrently? What advice do you have for the community here, Manan?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I think one of the things I always like to highlight is if you look up the unshackled portfolio companies, if they're hiring anybody, they are probably willing to hire a visa holder. And so it's part and parcel of the fact that we invest in immigrants, sponsor their visas. They're quite equipped to make that transition to hire people themselves without a lot of heartburn about it. So certainly in terms of opportunities, I think if you had a chance to work at Google, you are a highly qualified candidate for a lot of jobs. And so I would encourage you to use that confidence to reach out to startups in our portfolio that may be hiring that fit their need. In terms of more broadly on navigating, there are examples where we have accelerated our investment decision process based upon individuals' situation. So in this case, if your grace period is expiring in the next month or so, we are able and willing to accelerate the process to figure out if we can be a capital provider, an investor, because we recognize that you don't control your grace period. And if you did, you would do it for much longer. And so it's our job as a VC that invests in this population to meet you where you are. Beyond that, one of the things that we're actively exploring is there a way to scale our support in a fellowship mentality? More to come on that, but that would be looking in the order of magnitude of 50 to 100 people at one time versus trying to do 1 to 5 investments per quarter. And so what does that look like to help entrepreneurs? With that, I just will remind you all that Unshackled works as the employer in a lot of cases. And that's why we structured the firm the way we did 9 years ago. And so that allows us to file petitions on your behalf, whether it be H1B change of employment or begin the process of an O1 EB1 process as well. So a lot of things to share there, but a lot of it comes down to you're fit to be an entrepreneur, for us to invest in you. But if you're not and you want to be an employee, I would guide you to a lot of the portfolio founders that we've backed, some of which have hundreds of employees, and so they're actively hiring. They're well capitalized.
Thank you, Manan. Why don't I stay with you asking some of those questions about founding a startup and then working with you as a VC. In the meantime, Dennis, why don't I let you read the questions and then perhaps consolidate answers. I'll turn over the mic to you so you can sort of know what's on people's heads, and Xooglers and recent Googlers, please feel free to use the Q&A or use the webinar chat, and I'll get Dennis to read that. So Manan, let's talk about your process. So you're a VC firm, you have your own LPs, clearly you have a strategy of investing in immigrant founders. What is the process like? And after this call, if someone has always been a founder using this as an opportunity and a spur to found a company, what should they prepare, what they should be doing, how they should be reaching out? Can you talk about that, and what advice do you have for all of us?
Yeah, our process is really, really straightforward in terms of what Unshackled looks like. There is a form on our website that asks you to pitch what you're building, and we will look at it on a weekly basis. We do that intentionally because we don't assume that everyone has a warm intro to Unshackled, and our focus is to be the first people in. I will keep on iterating. We will move at the speed that you need us to move at. That is a bold proposition from a VC. I know that's not always done, but we recognize that specifically in Q1 and early Q2, there's a lot of timelines and deadlines in front of you. Now it's maybe about employment, but before it was about the H1B lottery and getting in your petition in the right time. And so for us, we're very equipped to handle scale and volume. And I want to make sure I'm answering the question specifically though, Christopher. Is there something that you want me to talk about around how to reach out to us, or how we evaluate and how do we deploy, that would be helpful here?
Yep, please do.
So the way we invest, it's typically 3 meetings, 2.5 hours less of a founder's time. We are really looking for founder problem fit. And so let me just be really specific. That means no revenue, no customers, typically no product. We oftentimes define this as, if you went to a friend and family member that had money and you said you're starting a company, will they say yes or no, regardless of the idea? We try to be that for the individual. And so what we're looking for is your narrative around why are you the person to solve this problem? What in your life, what in your professional journey, what in your academic journey, what in your social journey makes you feel really compelled to do that? It's our process, which is always going to be imperfect. It's to try to appreciate why you fit. And so there is a little bit of subjectivity in that, right? We don't invest in everything we see. Last year, we saw 2,591 deals. We made 15 investments. So it is a relatively challenging scope. And that's why I always am open about the fact that it is imperfect. But we try to just understand why you, why now, and why this. And we recognize many times immigrants have 2 constraints. 1, time to work full-time on their business. 2, immigration. And they tend to tie really well together. And so that is where our product market fit sits. Pre-incorporation is where we invest. 75% of our investments, the founders have never incorporated their business. They have not vested any equity. They have not raised any capital. We want to be that first check that other people follow. So to get to us, it's unlikely you'll be too early, but it's very likely you'll be too late if you've been building for some time.
Great. Thank you for sharing a bit more of that. So before I turn over to Dennis, I know Shreenath, as you can see, he's just very formally. He doesn't usually dress so formally. He put himself from a dinner to join us. Shreenath, why don't you chime in terms of what advice you have for people looking for jobs, based on your experience, and then we'll turn over to Dennis.
Yeah, I'd say I wrote down a few things that hopefully is useful, and I can also follow up and send this to anyone who needs it. But basically, first level is that just don't blame yourself. Layoffs are crazy. There's a large layoff. It's got nothing to do with you. I know it's easy to immediately think about yourself, but please don't. Second level is make a rough plan, and it's a little bit around so I was in the peak of a recession in 2008. I made a list of every single company and industry that I could think of. Every single I'd done consulting for a little bit, so I knew the clients. So made a list of every client, made a list of every person I knew in college, made a list of everyone who had ever worked with who would recommend me with high regards. Made that giant list and then just chased down those people and said, what do I want, right? And then it's hard because people you're just I just want a job. And they're like, but who are you? What are you? What are you doing? Chris's neighbor is someone who's hiring, but you don't know that yet. You need to like write to Chris with the right email so that he can forward it, but you don't know if there's a fit. So a lot of it comes down to almost like laying a wide net, being very clear about different roles that you're a good fit for, and almost laying them out separately. Right? It's very tactical. If you're deciding you don't want to start a company and you want to like work somewhere, and you have either direct and clear skill sets, then lay it out, put your resume simply, and then give it to friends and email them saying, here's 10 companies that are hiring. Here's the hiring manager, or here's the founder if it's a startup. Maybe here's the VP or the exec if it's a large company. And send that to like 10 or 15 BCC friends of yours. And do that every week. And then be like, hey, here's Chris, here's Manan, here's Dennis, here's Shree. We're going to email you all BCC and tell you all the companies and the roles I want. One of us will reply being like, oh, I know that guy. He's a good friend of mine. Let me help you. Oh, this woman's actually like my neighbor. She's amazing. She's founded a great company. You can work for her. I recommend you. So you'll find out that people can help you that you don't expect. The other tactical thing that's very useful is that don't look for people who are looking for H1Bs. Don't look for people who are explicitly not looking for H1Bs. It's much more useful to have an exec, a leader, a hiring manager love you, want to work with you, and then they'll tell their HR person that she's amazing, she should be on my team, and I want her here. Now, can you make sure the paperwork gets done, right? If it's a hiring company. So in a way, just don't over filter because of your recent stress about immigration for someone who's hiring for immigration. It's a lot more useful to actually chase people who will want you and want you immediately. And it's easy to get disheartened and say, I just want a job to stay in the country. I don't care what it is, but that's not useful for an employer. So your language and tone when you talk to someone should be authentic, that this is why it's a good fit. Here's how things I've done in the past matches to what you're looking for. Here's how there might be gaps. I'm a software engineer, I'm a PM, I'm an UX, I'm an HR. Here's what I've done in the past, and here's why I can be useful for you. You're still selling aggressively and positively about why you're a good fit for someone. And I'd highly recommend that, like, when you're thinking, even though you're in a stressful state and worried about your own status, the perception you want to create is scarcity, that they want to hire you because you're an amazing, talented person who's going to go somewhere else. And if you continue to do that in your style and delivery of your message, then it gets a lot easier. Like I found that, like, I applied to like 550 jobs, tracked them on a spreadsheet, got interviews at about 100, talked to all of them first rounds, got about 30 to second rounds, and then got a job in 2 of them. And that happened in between Thanksgiving and Christmas in like 2008 in peak of the recession. And so it was very stressful, but it's doable. But it's also like, don't beat yourself up when someone says no. It's often just timing. And so be kind to yourself, but also like push yourself, make sure you're like driving and pushing a little bit every day. But that's probably the most useful advice I'll have, is like, just like, don't be disheartened, but also be focused and disciplined about it as well.
So Shreenath, maybe I'll get you to drop your email in the chat, and then you can follow up as well. So Manan, if you don't mind, I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here. You can see on the chat, people are saying that the lawyers that Google has signed saying one thing, Dennis is saying another. Clearly, different lawyers have different opinions. You've probably seen many lawyer responses. Do you have any thoughts on what the date actually is?
I do. This is recorded and maybe public.
So don't say something you don't want to be recorded.
Yeah, no,
and type in what you
know. End of the day, I want to actually acknowledge what Dennis said. Right. This is something that is case by case and very personal. And the interpretation and adjudication is also case by case and personal. So there is the biggest challenge that we have with immigration in this country is that a lot of it's left to interpretation, and that interpretation can vary significantly from who you're working with and how they draft your petition or your change of status or your extension. It all matters. And so what I try to advise founders on is, if you're looking for somebody that is willing, that can be helpful for your situation, is talk to your friends that have had a counsel that have been creative. And not creative against the law, but creative in interpreting the law to give you the most optionality in it. And so if you're working with a big law firm, sometimes it's a little bit challenging because there's a model there that works. Small law firms tend to have a little more personalized time, but that doesn't always guarantee you that attorney's in a mood to help you. And so we work with Sorority Law Firm, and I'll put that out there. Been working with them for 9 years. Really, really big fan of their entrepreneurial spirit around helping people on visa start companies. That is something that was a very conscious decision 9 years ago, and they maintain to be our partner. That, however, does not mean that they're the only one that thinks this way, right? There's a lot of great names out there: Sophie Alcorn, Tamina Watson, Chris Wright in LA. You can go to Fragment. There's a lot of great attorneys, Jeff Goldblum, which we interact with, and founders have had really good experiences with. And so I do make an endorsement for a sorority law firm in terms of thinking about your case in a very unique and specific sort of way. But I cannot make a case on exactly what you should do based upon what we're reading here in the chat. That would be grossly unfair to you and likely inaccurate. And so I also put in the webinar chat, if you want someone that can give you a little bit more personal talk, but not an attorney, my co-founder, Nithin, who spent 15 years on an H1B, H4 EAD, got his O1, EB1, who started Unshackled with me while on an H1B visa. He was our guinea pig. He opens up his calendars for an AMA in 15-minute increments. There are times available. He will talk to you, and he will give you very personalized guidance based on his experience as an entrepreneur. And his wife being on an H1B, he's been through quite a bit of journey. And so he's willing to talk to you about it off the record. And so I would encourage you, especially if you are somebody that is waiting for a green card for a lot of years, he'll give you some perspective on what to do and how to ask certain questions to your counsel to get them to do something that might help you more readily. And that's what I can guide, is know what questions to ask your counsel, and then you may get what you want.
Thank you, Manan. Before I turn it over to Dennis, where there'll be his last question, last chance to answer something publicly and record it, and I'll pause it because I think there are a lot of personal questions here that we should stop the recording shortly. Manan, I want to ask you for a question regarding how should the attendees here and also people watching later, how should they be dealing with their stress? You've had to mentor a lot of people over the past decade. You've been doing this. Can you provide the advice that you can to people attending live or watching this later?
And I think my empathy is really high on these topics. And it's also one of those really candidly shitty things, because as a VC, I'm also working with founders that are doing layoffs for their employees. So I have to advise the founders and CEOs who are laying off people. That I get certainly a lot of people that we invest in that are the products of layoffs. And I think Shreenath was really positive about this. I really do respect what he was saying, which is the hardest thing you probably did was to get employed in the first place on that visa. That sets you apart, right? It's not as if everyone gets that employment. And certainly not everyone gets employed at Google. And so there is something special about you. There's something special about your narrative, something special about your story. And so what I would ask you to do, and I advise you oftentimes, is that I'm born and raised in the United States. I'm American. And by definition, I'm a little bit more egotistical and arrogant about my story than the average person is, because I'm American. Many immigrants tend to be very humble about their story. And I would ask you to think about your story in a little bit of a different way, and not just your resume and where you worked, but what did it take you to get to that university? What did it take you to get that job? There's a story in there that's really personal, that highlights your skill, your adversity muscle, and your ambition, that I think needs to show up in your job interviews. Because at the end of the day, Google will get you that interview probably, but it won't get you the job. What will get you that job is your personal story of what you had to overcome to get to be a small fish in a very big pond. My guess is when you left your home country, you were really important in a smaller population. You are not. You fought really hard. And so to the extent you can understand and appreciate your personal story, I think plays a huge role in ultimately closing that job and that deal. And that's especially hard when you're going through moments like this. To remember, how did I get to this point, and not think about all the negative, but think about all the positive that got you to where you were, and all the people that helped you along the way. They're still there. They're still there to help you.
Thank you, Manan. So I'll go to Dennis. Dennis, final words for the recording. What can you share? What should people be doing during this time?
So I just wanted to start by just mentioning again what Manan was doing about Shreenath. I thought his message about obviously just staying calm and having a little bit more of an introspective nature right now is definitely important. My general recommendation for individuals who are going through a 60 days grace period and looking for alternative options right now is, like everyone else is saying, don't panic. You have a set period of time right now, and you need to know how to spend it. So hopefully today's meetings, you're able to walk away with something beneficial. So there's a couple options that are naturally available, and I'm sure a lot of people have been feverishly Googling and trying to figure out what options are available. So I'm not necessarily going to be sharing anything too new, but I just want to go over the main broad strokes here. So obviously the first option that you could take up within your 60-day grace period would naturally be to depart the US. But considering we're in this call together today, I don't imagine anybody wants to take that route. So I think we can move on from that. So the next option would naturally be an H1B transfer application if one can be prepared for you. So for those who haven't actually had the benefit of going through an H1B transfer process before, the process is pretty unique because once an H1B application is filed on your behalf by a new employer, this benefits you essentially by allowing you to start with that new employer once the case is received and receipted by the government. So essentially you're allowed to start working with that new employer before your case is actually fully approved and adjudicated. So a couple of the timeframes that I do want individuals to keep in mind today, because H1Bs do move pretty quickly, but not as quickly as we would like. So the timeframes I want to lay out here are going to be important to make sure that you can at least hopefully move through an opportunity with a new H1B employer within the time available to you. So the first step for an H1B requires filing of a labor condition application. So many of the individuals who are holding H1B status might be familiar with this document. On average, it controls the position, the work site location, the dates of validity, and the employer. And this document takes about 7 to 9 days to get certified by the Department of Labor, and that's not enough. Just having this document certified will not stop that 60-day clock from continuing to roll, and you need the full H1B application submitted, signed by the attorney, and filed to the government. So a strong legal team should be able to organize this application for you fairly quickly. On average, I see this process taking about 2 to 3 days to about a week after the LCA is filed. A more aggressive legal team can certainly file this case a lot faster for you as well. The additional timeframes that I want everyone to keep in mind are obviously when those receipt notices are issued. For premium process cases, the receipt notices are typically issued electronically within 24 to 48 hours, so you should be able to start relatively quickly. For non-premium process cases, those receipt notices are issued via paper notice and typically come within about 3 to 5 calendar days, so could be a little bit of a wait there, but as long as your case made it to USCIS and is sitting with the government, you're in good shape and your 60-day clock is essentially stopped at that point. And the last note I want to make, and I want to give a warning before this, is that the last option really is a B1 change of status option. This is not something that necessarily everyone should try to pursue, and it's not going to be the greatest for every option, but it is certainly an option you could consider. And my warning here is that if you're moving through your 60-day grace period and you're beginning to approach your 30 days mark, and you don't have an H1B employer potentially interviewing you or vetting you for future H1B employment, it might be a strong idea to potentially consider a B1 change of status if you're looking to continue to stay in the US. So this process can be a little tricky, and depending on your specific facts or circumstances, there can be other ripple effects that come from this, but the broad strokes are that a B1 change of status application can be filed for you, but still must be filed within that 60-day grace period, which is why I flagged that 30 days mark, giving you a little bit of time to be able to find a legal team who can help support this process. The B1 change of status would effectively allow you an additional 6 months of time to be physically present in the US for visitor and leisure purposes, but not taking on any work. You would not be able to do any work. You cannot take on any free work for any company that would ordinarily pay a person to do that work, and you cannot be paid for any work that you're doing in general. So that really is the broad strokes of the B1 change of status option. It might not be perfect for everyone. There are some hiccups, but obviously if you wish to unpack that a little bit more, I'm more than happy to discuss this further. I'll leave a link in the chat, but you can always reach out to my firm at hello@immipartner.com. That's IMMIpartner.com. More than happy to obviously speak at length about any of these issues that I discussed today, as well as to potentially discuss any B1, B2 changes of status should they be needed, and help out with any other questions as well.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Shreenath, why don't you close us out this recorded section of the conversation, and we can go from there.
Sure. I think the only quick thing I was going to say to everyone is it might seem that like no one's hiring and everything's pretty difficult, but there are sectors of the economy right now that are also hiring immediately, who have like tons of job openings. Like Chris has posted a really big list of job openings. If you think sectors and areas that you're interested in, there are venture funds that are deeply invested in climate who have tons of job openings, for example, and that's just like an example. And there are other like sort of very clear job openings that are available. So just keep thinking about the fact that your personal network extends far wider than you realize, whether it's ex-Googlers you worked with, your old mentor, your managers, your cohort of Xooglers who you came in with. Like there's so many people who are well connected and perhaps in different places that you don't know about. And so I would just suggest cast a wide net and just be very open to the fact that you might not understand where your like next connection that's going to get you a job is going to be, or the person who's going to invest in your company. And so it's just feel open about it, and then you'll look back on it hopefully and think of this as a temporary blip of stress. And hopefully for all of you, you get through this to whatever successful outcome you want at the end of it.
Thank you, Shreenath. And for those watching the recording later, the Xoogler community is here for you. Feel free to email me, chris@xoogler.co, and I can connect you with any of the resources that was mentioned in the chat that you may not be able to see in the YouTube description section. We're here to support you. We were 14,000 members before Friday. We're now at 21,000 members and counting. We're going to have more than 100 volunteers to support you during this difficult time. And I definitely feel for you, especially since I was on H1B with Google. I want to make sure that you get every opportunity to potentially stay in the country by giving you all these resources. So thanks for watching this.